What if the anxiety you feel while walking into certain buildings is not your imagination? What if the specific emotional heaviness you notice in certain groups, certain online spaces, certain religious institutions is not just your projection? What if there is actually something there? Something that accumulated over time, something that feeds. Most materialist frameworks have no category for this. The building is made of bricks and mortar. The institution is just people and policies. The online community is just text and screens. But the mystics, the occultists, the depth psychologists, and increasingly a handful of researchers in the emerging field of collective consciousness, they point to something that has no clean materialist explanation. When large numbers of people pour the same emotional energy into the same pattern over long periods of time, that pattern begins to take on a life of its own. It begins to behave as if it had agency. This is not a superstition. It is one of the most practically important things you will ever understand about how the world actually operates. My name is Jonathan. Welcome back to Alchemy of Remembrance. Today we are going into the territory of egregores. The word egregore comes from the Greek egregoroi, the watchers. In early religious texts, this referred to angelic beings who descended into the material world and became entangled in it. But the meaning that is more useful for our purposes is the one that developed in the Western esoteric tradition, particularly in the work of 19th and 20th century occultists and ceremonial magicians. An egregore in this tradition is a collective thought form. It is a psychic entity, or more precisely, a psychic structure, that forms when a large group of people consistently focus their attention, emotion, and intention on the same pattern. Let's think about what that actually means mechanically. Every time a thought is thought, it generates a subtle energetic imprint. Every time an emotion is felt in association with a particular image, symbol, belief, or entity, that association is reinforced. When this happens collectively, when millions of people over decades or centuries pour fear, devotion, desire, longing, and obsession into the same symbolic container, the resulting accumulation is not nothing. It becomes something with coherence, something that can influence the emotional field of anyone who enters its vicinity, something that functions almost like a local intelligence, not in the way a conscious being is intelligent, but in the way a self-perpetuating system is intelligent. It knows what sustains it, and it acts to sustain itself. An egregore feeds on emotional charge. It is not selective about the polarity of that charge. Fear feeds it as effectively as devotion. Outrage feeds it as effectively as joy. What it cannot sustain itself on is neutral attention. Indifference is its only enemy. Once you understand what an egregore is, you start recognizing them everywhere. And I do mean that quite literally. Every major religion has an egregore, not the original spiritual reality that the religion was pointing toward. That is often something far deeper and older, but the accumulated psychic mass that formed around the institution over centuries of collective worship, fear, guilt, devotion, and projection. That accumulation is real. And it is not always benign. Every large corporation has an egregore, every nation has an egregore, every political ideology has an egregore, every long-standing cultural movement, including spiritual movements, including conscious community spaces, has an egregore. And because egregores feed on emotional charge, they are not neutral about their own survival. A strong egregore will subtly influence the people within its field to keep producing the emotions that sustain it. It's the feedback loop. A religious egregore built on fear will keep generating theological frameworks that produce fear. A corporate egregore built on scarcity will keep shaping culture in ways that produce anxiety about scarcity. A political egregore built on outrage will keep finding new sources of outrage to funnel through its members. This is not a conspiracy in the deliberate, conscious sense. Most of the people inside these systems are often not aware of the mechanism at all. They are simply participating in what feels normal, what feels like their own genuine emotional response. But that is precisely what makes egregoric influence so effective. It feels like you. Now, I want to go somewhere more subtle. Because the most dangerous egregores are not the obviously dark ones. The most dangerous are the ones dressed in spiritual clothing. Here is something that most spiritual communities do not discuss honestly. When a teacher, a lineage, a community, or a spiritual practice gathers a large and emotionally charged following, an egregore begins forming around it. This can happen even with a teacher of genuine insight, genuine clarity, and genuine transmission. What happens is this: the followers begin projecting onto the teacher qualities that belong to the archetype: infallibility, omniscience, divinity. The teacher, if they are not deeply grounded, begins to absorb and believe those projections. The community's shared emotional intensity, the devotion, the spiritual hunger, the longing for the sacred, creates a powerful energetic field. And that field, over time, develops its own agenda. The agenda is always the same: continuation, self perpetuation. The egregore wants to keep being fed. And so subtly it begins shaping the community in ways that ensure its emotional supply. Dependency deepens. Independent thought is discouraged, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly. The questioning member is made to feel that their doubt is a spiritual failing. The boundary setter is made to feel that their limits are signs of insufficient devotion, and so on. Well, I am describing here the architecture of cult dynamics. But I want to be careful here, because this is not only about extreme cases. This pattern exists on a spectrum. It shows up in mildly controlling spiritual communities as well. It shows up in online spiritual influencer followings. It shows up in yoga studios and meditation centers and anywhere that spiritual authority becomes concentrated and questioning is subtly discouraged. The question to ask of any spiritual environment is not simply, does this feel good? Egregoric fields often feel intensely good. The collective emotional charge can feel like a genuine spiritual experience. The question is, does this environment increase my sovereignty or decrease it? Does it make me more capable of trusting my own inner compass or less? I want to bring this now into the present moment, because the most powerful egregores of our time are not located in temples or in lodges. They are located in digital architectures. The social media algorithm is, in a very real sense, an egregore farming system. It is specifically designed to identify and amplify the emotional frequencies that generate the most sustained engagement. And what generates the most sustained engagement is not beauty, not wisdom, not nuance. It is outrage, fear, communal identity, and the intoxicating mixture of validation and threat. Every time you scroll through a feed in a state of emotional activation, heart rate elevated, nervous system engaged, attention captured, you are feeding a field. And that field is shaped quite deliberately to keep you in a state that keeps you feeding it. This is really not metaphorical here. The engineers who designed these systems understood the psychology of variable reward schedules. They understood that intermittent emotional activation is more addictive than consistent positive feedback. Thus, the design was intentional, and its effect on the collective emotional field of humanity over the past 15 years has been, I would argue, one of the most significant egregoric interventions in human history. Understanding this does not mean abandoning digital life entirely, but it means bringing consciousness to your relationship with it. It means asking every time you engage, am I feeding this or is this feeding on me? Am I choosing this interaction or am I being pulled into it by a system designed to capture my charge? Consciousness is the only protection. Not avoidance, but genuine awareness of what is happening in your body and your attention whenever you enter these fields. So, what is the practical response to all of this? How does a person navigate a world saturated with egregoric fields without either becoming paranoid or becoming unconsciously absorbed into them? The first and most essential practice is what I call energetic discernment. Before you enter any significant collective space, a community, a movement, a strong online conversation, a religious gathering, take a breath and notice your baseline state, your emotional tone, your bodily sensation, your level of mental clarity. Then, after some time inside the field, check again. Has your baseline changed? Are you more anxious, more activated, more certain, more dependent, more inflated? Any strong shift that you cannot trace to a specific conscious experience is worth examining. The second practice is what I call not feeding. Every egregore requires emotional supply to maintain itself. If you move through a field with genuine neutrality, not suppression, not cold distance, but real presence without reactivity, you provide no supply. Now, this definitely requires inner work because the field will activate your existing sensitivities in order to generate charge. The healing of your own wounds is, in this sense, also a practice of egregoric resistance. Third, and this applies especially to spiritual communities, always preserve your inner authority. No matter how gifted a teacher, no matter how transformative a lineage, no matter how beautiful a community, the measure of its authenticity is whether it points you back toward yourself. The genuine transmission always increases sovereignty, your self-remembrance. If you find yourself increasingly dependent, increasingly afraid to question, increasingly defined by your membership, that is a signal from the egregore, not from the truth. A healthy relationship to any collective field is one of conscious participation. You bring yourself to it. You take what is genuinely nourishing, and you leave what is not yours to carry. So, the egregore is not a comfortable idea. It asks us to reckon with the fact that our emotional lives are not as private as we assume, that we are constantly in exchange with collective fields, that the feelings we take to be purely our own are often, at least in part, frequencies we have absorbed from the world around us. But this is not cause for despair, it is a cause for consciousness and self-awareness. Because the moment you understand how these fields work, you stop being their unconscious servant. You become someone who can move through them deliberately, contributing what you choose to contribute and refusing to feed what no longer deserves your energy. Next week, we go into one of the most important and least honestly discussed topics in the spiritual world. What happens when the thing that was supposed to liberate you becomes a source of harm? The trap of false light, spiritual communities, and religious trauma. I am Jonathan. This is Alchemy of Remembrance. I will see you in the next one. Have a blessed day. Peace and love.